Material UI is just a UI component library for React that comes fully baked with loads of easy to use components for things like buttons, nav bars, form elements, a grid system, etc. And you can see all of these different components right here. Now, they're all styled following the material design specification. And material design is just a design philosophy by Google which bunches together a load of design best practices and principles for websites and apps, so that website or app users have a solid, consistent, and generally nice experience when they're on them. And it includes specification for things like buttons or nav bars, banners, chips, checkboxes, different form elements, all that kind of stuff. So it's a bit like Bootstrap, but by Google instead. So when you use Material UI for your React applications, your website components are going to look the same as the components that we see right here. So just so you can have a quick peek at what a React application looks like using Material UI, I've prepped this project right here. And this is the mini project we're going to be building as we learn more about it. And along the way, I'm going to show you how to implement a bunch of Material UI components like cards, this app bar at the top, avatars, icons, the side drawer, the grid system, and also a bit about web forms as well. And on top of all of that, I'm going to show you how to use another package called React Masonry CSS to give us this masonry grid system right here. And we'll do that at the end of the series. So if we take a quick look at the code that makes up one of the pages I just showed you, you can see that using Material UI basically just means using a bunch of pre-made components like container or typography for text or a text field for a form input. So this is basically 90% of what Material UI is, and we can customize how these different components look using props. And the good thing about using Material UI is that it is very customizable. We can create custom themes to personalize how our site looks, and we can also override the default styles of components using our own CSS and a styles hook that Material UI gives us. So we're going to learn how to do all of this and more over the next 18 lessons or so. So instead of creating a new React app from absolute scratch to start this project, I've already prepped a bare bones starter project with just a couple of blank pages and the React router setup as well. And I've uploaded this to GitHub at this repo right here, Material UI Tuts. So the link to this is going to be down below. And to get this starter project, just make sure you have the lesson 1 branch selected right here, and then you can download a zip folder of the project. Now I've already done that and it's right here on my desktop. So I'm just going to extract this right here. So extract, and then when it's done that, I'm going to open up this window and you'll see this folder, Material UI Tut Lesson 1. Now, I'm just going to rename this, so Material Tut, just so it's shorter, and then I'm going to right click this and I'm going to open it up with code to open it in VS Code. And this here, my friends, is the starter project. Now, like I said, this is a very bare bones setup. It's not is going to be down here. So extract name, and of course we can see the root component app. JS, and inside here I've already set up the React router. We import all the things we need for that to work right here from React router DOM, and by the way, that is in package.json as a dependency right here. So this router tag surrounds the switch tag, which means that only one route will show at a time. And this route right here is to the exact path /. Then we show the notes component. This one right here to /create. And in that case, we showed the create component. Both of those components are being imported from the pages folder, which is where our page components are going to go. The notes one, dead simple, just some text that says notes page. And the create one, the same. This time it says create page. So that is pretty much it. We also have this index.css file with some very basic styles to begin with, and inside the index.js file, which kickstarts the app, we're importing those styles right here and the root component so we can set it up. So that is basically it for the startup project. Now the first thing we really need to do is open up a terminal, and then we need to install all of the dependencies, because when you download this code from GitHub, the dependencies are not present. We don't see a node modules folder anywhere. So if we run npm install in the roots of our project, it's going to look inside this package.json file at all of the dependencies, and it's going to install all of those. If you don't do this step, nothing is going to work. Cool, so now that's done, we can run this project in a browser by typing npm start and hitting enter. That's going to spin up a local development server for us, so we can preview this. And it's opened up in a browser on my other screen, so let me just scoot that across over. here, and we can see just this notes page text right here. This is the notes component for the root path, and if we go to /create, then we should get the create component. Okay, so next up we need to install Material UI into our project as well. So go to the Material website, and the link to that is going to be down below, and click on Get Started. And if we scroll down, you see we can install it by saying npm install at material-ui/core, and this is the core part of the Material UI library. Now, it includes most of the components, but not the icon ones, but don't worry, we'll come to the icon ones later in the course. So I'm going to copy this, and back in my project, I'm going to open up a new terminal, and then paste it in, and press enter. So that's going to install Material UI for us. Now, there's one more thing to do. Material UI under the hood uses the Roboto fonts, and it doesn't include this in the core library. We have to install it ourselves. So all you need to do is grab this link right here, or go to the Google Fonts website and grab it. But you can just grab this and paste it inside your index.html file right here. Now, if you've got the starter files, I've already done it for you, and it's right here, so you don't need to paste it in twice. But anyway, now that is Material UI installed, in the next video we'll take a look at our first component, and that is going to be the typography component. Alright then gang, so now we have Material UI installed, we can go ahead and start using the Material UI components. Now the first one I want to show you is the typography component. And generally the first thing I do when I'm using a new component I've never used before is just search for it in the Material UI docs up here. So if I type typo, then it's going to come up typography, and if we click on that, we can see how this typography component is used if we scroll down. So when we're using Material UI, we generally don't have to use H1 tags, H2 tags, paragraph tags, etc. Instead, we just use a typography component, and then we can customize how that typography component is going to look and what tag it should be when it's output to the browser, whether it should be an H1 or an H3 or a paragraph tag, etc. So you can see right here, all of these different headings and paragraphs, they are all output using the typography component. And if we take a look at this, show the source, and scroll down here, first of all, you can see we import this typography component like so. And if we scroll down further, we can see we're using the typography here and here and here for all these different headings and paragraphs as well. So all we do is nest our text in between the opening and closing typography component, and then inside this component, as props, we can specify how we want this typography to look. You can see we have this variant prop right here, and this is us basically telling the typography component what we want it to be. Do we want it to be an H1? Or rather, do we want it to be styled like an H1 so it's big, or styled like an H2 so it's quite big but not as big, etc. And there's all these different variants we can use. You see we have this for essentially paragraph tags, but we have two different variants of paragraph tags, body 1 and body 2. And also we see we have this component thing right here. This specifies what tag is going to be output to the browser when we use this typography component. So if we want it to look like an H1, which is what this variant thing does for us, but we want it to output as an H2 tag, we can override this and say the component should be an H2. By default, if this wasn't here, it would be output as an H1 because that's what we specify the variant to be. But this is here to override that if we want to output it as something else. So then, let's give this a little whirl in our project. Alright then, so I'm going to work inside one of our pages, and it's going to be the create page right here, and I want to use the typography component inside this React component. So the first thing we have to do is import it. So to do that, I'm going to say import typography, that's the component, from, and it's at material-ui/core / the component name, which is typography. Okay, so there's two ways we can import things. We can either import them like this, or we can take off this part at the end of core, and instead we can destructure the different components we need like so. Now, it's entirely up to you which way you prefer. This way is slightly less performant, but only very slightly, than the other way. I probably will use a mix of ways. I just wanted to let you know. So now we're importing the typography component, we can go ahead and use it in this page. So let me do a few examples. What I'm going to do is create a new typography component, opening and closing tag, and then inside we'll just say create a new note, like so. Okay, so now if I get rid of this create page at the top and save this, I'm going to go over to the create page in the browser, and we can see create default type Well, I can just add props. So I can say variant is going to be equal to h1, like so. And if I save this now and preview, we can see that now it's an h1 tag over here, and it's much bigger in the browser. Okay, cool. So generally, when I add props to these different components, I might be adding several different props. And if I add them all going across this way, pretty soon it's going to go off the screen. So what I tend to do is move this down to the next line like so, and then move this down. And what I can do is add them one after another below each other. So now we can also change the color of these typography components, the text color. And to do that, we can pass in the color prop. Now we can't just pass in any old color here, we can only pass in our different theme colors. Now we'll talk more about themes and colors later on, but for now we'll just use one called primary. So if I save that, it's going to use the primary theme color, which is kind of like this blue color by default. This can also be secondary, and we'll see that in a second, but for now let's try adding another prop. It's going to be an align prop. This is used to align the text, so we could align it to the center, for example. If I save that, then it's going to be in the center. Cool. All right then, so let's try another example. What I'm going to do is copy this, and then I'm going to comment it out so it doesn't show. And I'm going to paste it down here and change it. So let's now try, instead of primary, secondary, like this. So this is another theme color. And in fact, what I'm going to do is take away this variant, because I just want it to be a paragraph tag now. And we'll also take away this align thing as well. So if I save this and preview, we can see now we get this reddy pink color. That is the secondary theme color. Now, I'm going to get rid of this text, and I'm going to use some lorem ipsum instead. So let me just add that on and save it and preview. And can you see how it goes over several different lines? Now, we can add a no wrap prop to this. So if I say no wrap camel case, like so, and save this, take a look what happens. You can see it truncates the text. So when it reaches the end of the browser over here, we get 3 little dots at the end of the text, and it doesn't go over to the next line. If I make this a bit bigger, we can see it carries on. So this is a nice way to truncate the text if you just want to show maybe a little preview or a snippet on one line of the text, maybe on a blog preview on the homepage or something like that. Cool. So there's many different things we can do with the typography component. And if you want to see all of the different props that you can pass into the typography component, you can go to the docs. And if we just scroll down here, right to the bottom, and you'll see this API option. Click on this typography tag at the bottom, and then scroll down, and you can see all of the different props that we can pass in right here. So we've seen a line. We've seen color, and these are the different things we can pass into color. Like I said, you can't pass in any old hex code or anything like that, just these different things. And we'll take a look at these different theme values later in the course. We can also pass in display or the component. We talked about that before if we want to output the typography component as something else. So not, for example, an H1 that we specify here, but we could output it as an H3 instead. And if we scroll down, we can see we've also got this gutter bottom. And if that's true, then it's going to have a bottom margin. We've got no wrap, loads of different things. These are the variants right here. So we've seen H1. We've also got things like body 1, body 2, captions, etc. So you can have a little play around with those as well. What I'm going to do is delete all of this that we've got so far, and I'm going to create a new typography component. And this is going to be for the header on this page. And the header is going to be create a new note. Then inside we'll add a few props. So the first thing I want this to be is an H6. So I'm going to say variance and set that equal to H6. Now, if we take a look at this, I'm going to save it and preview over here. This is the kind of size I want it to be. So it's styled like an H6. And also, we're outputting an H6 tag right here. Now, it's fine how it looks, but I actually want it to be an H2. So what I'm going to do is add in the component prop like so and set that equal instead to H2. Now, this is still going to look like the H6 because we have the variant set to H6, but the actual HTML right here is outputting H2, and that's what I want. Okay, so next I'm going to apply a gutter bottom. So let me say gutter bottom like so. Now I don't need to set it equal to true or anything. All I need to do is pass in the prop name, and that will set it equal to true automatically. And now if we hover over this, we can see that orange little margin below the text. And then finally, I want to change the color of this. So let me add in a color prop up here, and I'm going to set that equal to text secondary like so. secondary. Have I spelled this correctly? Yep. Save that and preview, and we can see now this is a grayish color. Don't get this confused with secondary. That's the secondary theme color, which is at the minute pink. This is text secondary, which is kind of like a grayish color. That's the color that I want for this heading. So there we go, my friends. That is the typography component. As you can see, it's pretty flexible, and I find myself never really needing to use an actual paragraph tag or an H1 or an H2 or anything like that directly. I just use this typography component instead. So definitely have a play around with the other props that we can pass into this typography component. We will be using it a lot as we go forward as well. But next up, I want to take a look at a different component, buttons. Alright then gang, so in this video I want to move on to our second component, and that is going to be the button component. So again, same as before, whenever you start to use a new component, you can just type that component in the search bar in the documentation, click on it, and you're going to see a lot of examples using that component and how to implement them in the code. So right here, the first examples we see are contained buttons. And contained buttons are probably the most popular type of button, and the button I use most in my applications when I use Material UI. And they are buttons which have a background color like this, and also a little drop shadow to bring it away from the page. So if we come down here, we can see the code for these is a button component, and then the variant, much like we had variants before for the typography component, we also have them for button components, and a lot of the components you're going to use in the future will also have this variant prop to change how we display that component. And in this case, it is a contained button. All right, so by default, this button is this grayish color right here with black text, but we can set the color of the background by using the color prop. And again, these are theme colors, not colors randomly plucked out from a hex generator or anything like that. They are theme colors. So in this case, primary is the blue one. And the good thing about Material UI is that when we use a color as the background that is a bit darker, it automatically sets the text color to white to contrast that. That's pretty cool. We have a secondary one right here. We also have a disabled button, which is a faded out text like this, and it removes the drop shadow. And down here we can see we also have an href attached to this, which you can do. You can apply hrefs to buttons as well. So that's one variant of the button. But if we scroll down, we can see other types of buttons as well. This is still contained, but we're using a disable elevation prop on this to take away the drop shadow. If we scroll down here, this is a text button. Now, these are the default types of buttons if we don't pass through a variant. You can see right here, there's no variant, and we get a text button when we don't pass a variant, and that's just text. And when we hover over it, a very faint color. Again, we can set the color of these buttons by using the color prop. If we scroll down, we have outlined buttons, which are also pretty popular. I use these quite a lot as well. And these are buttons just with an outline. Line of whatever color we set, and when we hover over them we get a very faint color as well. So the variant for this is outlined like so. And there's also other examples if you scroll down, different sizes, also buttons with icons, which we are going to take a look at later on in the course as well. Well, for now though, let's try creating a couple of buttons in our code. Okay, so like any component, the first thing we need to do is import that component. So let me open up the source code and grab this import statement right here. So we import button from material UI core button. So copy that and paste it right over here at the top of the file. We're still in create.js, by the way. And underneath the typography, let's do a few examples of buttons. So first of all, I'm just going to do a button like so with some text inside, submit. And by the way, we can also apply the type, and you can set that equal to type equals submit. So that is a submit button now. All right, so if we now apply a color to this, and we'll set it equal to primary, for example. I'm going to save this and see what it looks like in the browser. So let's go over here and we can see this button. It's a text button with no fill in the background, but when we hover over it, we get that very light blue color in the background. So this is the default type of button, remember, without a variant. Now, if we were to set this to default, like here for the color, it's going to be black text and then kind of a gray background when we hover over it. But if you ever want to use the default color, we don't actually need to set the color. We can take that off and it's still going to be that default color. All right, so let's do another example. It's still going to be type is equal to submit. This time I'm going to say the color is equal to secondary, but also this time we'll change the variant like so. So we'll set that equal to outlined, for example. Save that and preview. And now we can see we get this outlined button right here. Awesome. Now, I also want to show you something called a button group. And to do that, we need to import one more thing. So I'm just going to copy this import from my repo and paste it right here. So a button group from material UI /core/button group like so. Now, a button group is basically a wrapper for several buttons that belong together, and then it styles them as though they are together. I'm going to show you what this looks like now. So we'll do a button group first of all, and inside there we'll do a few different buttons. So the first one, and I'll just say one inside here. I'm going to duplicate this a couple of times, and we'll say 2 right here and 3 right here. So if I save this now and preview, we can see now we get this thing right here where they're all bunched up together. together, and that looks quite nice. So that's what a button group looks like. Now, if you want to apply styles to these buttons, we can do that on this one single button group component. So I could, for example, say call it here is secondary, like so, and save it. And if I preview that, it looks pretty good. Now, I could also apply a variant to this. So I could say variant and set that equal to contained. And save it, and we get that different style of button. Looks pretty nice, right? So that's a button group. Now, what I'm going to do is comment all of this out, and I'm going to create a button for our form. We don't have a form yet, but we will have later to create new notes. And this button is going to be to submit that form. So let me create this. Okay, so the text is going to be submit. Now, the type of this is going to be a submit button. So let me do that. Type is equal to submit. And then after this, I'm going to say the color is secondary. And then down here, we'll say the variant is equal to contained. Like so. So let's take a look at that, save it, and there we go. That's our submit button. And by the way, we can remove the elevation by saying disable elevation, like so. Save that, and it takes away that drop shadow. Now, I do want the drop shadow, so I'm going to get rid of that. All right, so we have this button. We can also apply on-click events to the button. So all I need to do is say up here, on-click, set that equal to some kind of function. So I'll do a function here, which fires a console log that says you clicked me. All right, so if I save this now and preview, I'm going to inspect this first of all, if I can. go to the console and click on this, and you can see you clicked me. Awesome. So there we go, my friends. That's buttons in a nutshell. Very, very flexible. We will be working with them a fair amount later on as well, including using icons inside the buttons. I want to do one more thing in this tutorial, and that's not to do with buttons. That's just to kind of create a wrapper around all of our content. And to do that, I'm going to be using a container component. So I'm just going to import it at the top first of all. We can get rid of the button group because I'm not going to be using that, but I will paste in this container right here. Now, a container is basically a wrapper that goes around your content, and it applies some margin and padding to that content so that it's not going to be right flush against the edge of the browser. So I'm going to change this div right here into a container. Instead, and the closing div right here, container. Save that and preview, and you can see the margin on the left. Cool, so that is pretty much it. In the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use icons in Material UI. Alright then gang, so now I want to show you how to use icons in Material UI. Now to use icons, we have to install another package. If we scroll down here, and by the way, I'm on the Getting Started guide right here. If we scroll down, we can see we have to use npm install Material UI / icons, because these don't come automatically with the core package. So I'm going to copy this and come over to my project. Let me close that, open up a terminal, and I'm going to paste it in to install these icons. And now we've done that, we can use icons in our project. Now, Material UI gives us access to all the different icons in the Google Material Design specification. And if you want to choose an icon or just see what icons are on offer, all you have to do is search for Material icons like this, click on this top one, and this is going to show you all the different icons we can have. So AC unit, alarm clocks, etc. You can search for icons up here, for example, arrow or whatever you want, and there's also different variations of the icons as well. So this is filled. We also have outlined ones, rounded, two-tone, etc. So I'm going to go with the outlined one, and I want to use this one right here, this icon, AC unit outlined. So if I click on that, it shows us how we need to import it right here. So I could copy that and come over to my create components, and I can just paste in right here. So now all I need to do is use this as a component where I want to output this icon. So let me come down to the bottom. I'm going to delete all of this stuff from the last lesson, and I'm going to do a little comment to say icons. And then below this, I'm just going to output this thing right here. So I can copy that and I can open up my tag and close it off like so. Now we don't need an opening and closing tag. We can just have one, which is self-closing. Alright then, so if I save this and preview over here now, we can see this icon right here. Awesome. Now what I'm going to do is place a BR tag just above the icons, so they go to the next line below the button, like that. Okay, so that's the standard icon, but we can also pass props into these icons as well. So let me just duplicate this, and I can pass in a color prop. So I could set that equal to secondary. And if I save this, it should be that pink color right here. Awesome. So as well as that, we can also specify things like the font size. So if I say font size and set it equal to large and save this, then we can see that this one is larger than this one. Now I'm just going to duplicate this right here and change this to small so you can see the difference. So this one's large, this is the default, and then this is small, which is smaller than the default one. Cool. So let's just duplicate this 3 more times, and I'm just going to change the colors right here. And again, these are theme colors, and we can also pass in action as a color, error as a color, and down here I'm going to say disabled. So if I save this and preview, you can see we have this one, which is the action one. Then we have this one, which is the error one, and then disabled, which is a light grey. Awesome. And again, we can customize these different colors, and we'll see how to do that when we talk about themes later on. Anyway, that's the icons in a nutshell. We can also apply icons to buttons. So let me just comment out all of this for now. And what I want to do is apply an icon to this button right here. Now, you can apply one at the start on the left and at the end. So let me say, for example, start icon. This is the prop we use on the button to have one at the start, and we set that equal to an icon component. And then for the end, we'd say end icon, and we'd set that equal to another icon component. Now I'm just going to search for these icons that I want to use right here. So I'm going to search for one called send, and these are going to be filled icons. So we'll go with this one right here. So I'm going to copy this and paste it over here up above, and in fact we can get rid of this one because we're not going to use that anymore. So I'll paste that one in, and I'm also going to look for an arrow one. It's called keyboard arrow, and it's keyboard arrow right, this one right here. So again, let me copy this import and paste it down here like so. So I'm going to use this right here as the start icon. So I'm going to say send icon like so. And I'm going to say down here, keyboard arrow right icon. That was this one right here. So let's now preview this. I'm going to save it, come over here to the browser, and we can see we have an icon on the left now and an icon on the right. So I don't really want this start icon, so I'm going to get rid of that and save it. And now we just have the icon on the right. Awesome. Cool. So we will be using icons a lot more in the future of this playlist. But again, dead simple to use. All you need to do is, first of all, install the icon package, then import whatever icons you need up at the top, and then finally just use a tag or component to output that icon. Dead simple. Alright then, so Material UI components, like this button right here, come fully styled with built-in CSS. So we don't really need to write any of our own CSS for this to look good on the page. But sometimes we might want to tweak something a little bit, maybe add a bit of margin around the elements or give it a different color not specified by the theme options that we've seen. Now for this, we can use a function that Material UI gives us called make styles. And using this function, we can create CSS classes and rules using JavaScript objects. Then this function returns to us a React hook, which we can then use inside our components to access those styles and classes. And we can apply them then to any element in our React components. So let's give this a whirl. So the first thing we need to do is import this make styles function. So I'm just going to paste this in. And notice this time I'm importing it by destructuring it from the core library right here. So that's important. It won't work if you try to import it the other way without destructuring and saying / make styles. This is not going to work. This right here is not a component. It's a function we're importing from the core library. So we destructure it like so. Okay, so now we have that function. Now we can use it, and I'm going to use it outside of our component to begin with. So we're going to store the result of this function in a constant, and I'll call that use styles, and this follows the convention of a React hook by starting with use, and I'm going to set that equal to make styles like so, which is function we just imported. Now in here we pass in an object as an argument, and inside this object we create our different CSS classes and rules inside those classes. Now each property inside this object is going to be a CSS class, if you like. So I could create one called button, for example, and inside here this is going to be an object, and the object will specify the different properties of this button. So I could say, for example, font size, and it's all camel case, and I'm going to set that equal to 60, which is 60 pixels. And I could also set the background color, so background color, and it's going to be violet, like so. So now, how would I use this class and these styles inside my components, because I want to use it on this button right here? Well, all we do is we fire this hook, because this returns to us a hook, which is now stored inside this constant. We can use that inside this create component. So I'm going to say const classes is equal to use styles like so, and we invoke that hook. So this right here returns to us basically an object with all of the different classes on it, so we can access the button class on it. Now, what if we want to apply that button class to something in this component? Well, we just say classes.btn for the class. So I'm going to go down to the button and I'm going to apply a class name to this. So I'll say class name, which is just how we apply a class to a React component. It's going to be something dynamic, and it's going to be classes, which is what this hook right here returns to us, and then dot whatever the class was called. In our case, button. So then it's going to apply these different properties to this element right here. Now, if I save this and preview, I'm going to refresh over here. Now we can see that we get a massive font size, and also we get this pinky color. But when we hover over it, we still get the default hover effect. So what if I also want to apply a hover style to this button as well? So what I could do is come up here, and I'm going to do a comma after this property. And on the next line, I'm going to do another property, but this time as a string, and it's going to be ampersand, and then colon, and then the pseudo effect or the pseudo class, which is going to be hover. And then this is going to be equal to another object. And this is how we apply the hover state to this class. So I can now say that the background, when we hover, and this could be background color, it doesn't really matter, and that is going to be blue. So if I save this now and preview when we hover, it now becomes blue. It's violet when we're not hovering, blue when we do hover. Awesome. Okay, so I can also create more classes. So I could do a comma after button, and this time do title, and that again is going to be an object. Inside here we'll say text decoration, and that's going to be underline, like so, and then a comma to do another. Property, and that's going to be the margin bottom, which is going to be be 20 pixels. So now I want to apply this title class to this typography component, and again, dead simple. We can just say class name and set it equal to classes dot title. Save that and preview, and now we can see this is underlined right here, and it has a bit more margin at the bottom. So this make styles function right here It's very useful for adding extra custom CSS rules, and we will be using it quite a lot as we go forward. And we'll see more that we can do with it too, like passing arguments and have dynamic values for CSS properties. But next though, we're going to move on to custom material UI themes. Alright then gang, so we've seen already that when we use material UI components, they have these kind of base styles. They have a font family, which is Roboto, and they also have theme colors, things like secondary or primary if you want. And by the way, I've removed all of the different classes we created in Make Styles in the last video, but I've kept this hook right here just in case we use them in the future. But anyway, we've got all of these base theme colors if you like, and we can see one of those right here. This is the secondary one, and if we change this to primary, then it's going to become blue because that is the primary theme color. Now, the theme in Material UI is a bit like a giant object with all of these different properties and values which specify things like what colors should be the primary and secondary colors, how big an H1 variant of the typography component should be, or what font family should be used for all different components. Now, you can actually view this default theme on the Material UI docs. So let me just show you that. I'm going to come up here and type in default, if I can spell this, is default theme like this, and I'm going to click on that, and we can see this kind of object, if you like, that we can expand. So we can see we've got some breakpoints built in and all of these different keys in here. So these are the different breakpoints that we have: extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. And if we open up the values, we can see the pixel values of those breakpoints. We can also see down here we have the color palette, and this is where we specify the primary colors, and this is the main primary color right here, and the secondary colors. If we go down here, we have some error stuff, some error colors. And if we go down, we can see some stuff for typography, such as the HTML font size, the different things for the H1 variation, etc. So there's a load of default values in this default theme. Now, if you don't like any of those default values, you can create your own theme to override these values. That doesn't mean you have to recreate this whole theme object like this and do every single value. That would take ages. But you can just pick and choose which properties you want to define yourself, and then it will take precedence over the default values. So let's give this a try. So first of all, I'm going to open up the app component, which is the root component. This is where we're going to create our theme, and we're going to create it here so that it can wrap the rest of our application. And that way, our entire application can access this theme. Now, the first thing we need to do is import a couple of things. So I'm going to paste these in. We have two things. We have this function right here, create MUI theme, and this is the function we use to create a custom theme object. And then we also have a component called theme provider, both coming from the core library. And this theme provider right here, this is the thing that's going to wrap our entire application and pass in the custom theme that we create with this function, thereby giving our application access to that custom theme. So let's start now by creating a theme. We're going to store this in a constant, and I'm going to call it theme, and I'll set it equal to create MUI theme. So this function takes in an object as an argument, and this object represents the theme that we want to create. Now, like I said before, we can just pick and choose which properties that we want to override. So for example, if I just want to override the primary main color, I can do. If we go back over here and come down to the palette, you can see, first of all, there's a property called palette, which we need to go into, then into the primary property, then the main property. And if we give a different value for this, it will override the default main value of the primary color, which is what is this button right here at the minute. So I'm going to come over here and say, first of all, into palette, and then inside that, we want to access the primary color, and then inside that we need to specify the main color. So I can pass in any hex code here that I want. So I'm going to say FE, 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 which is like a really, really light grey, almost white, but not quite. So if I save this now and preview this in a browser, I'm going to refresh, nothing happens. And that's because I said at the minute, this theme isn't doing anything and our application doesn't have access to it. We need to provide our application with this theme, and that's what we use the theme provider for. So I'm going to wrap everything with the theme provider component. And then let me just close this off and place this at the end like so. And get this in. Then we pass a prop called theme to this, and we set it equal to whatever theme that we want to provide to our application. Now, in our case, it's this thing right here, theme. So let me copy that and paste it right here. So now, if I save this, hopefully this will now work. And instead of that button being blue, which was the default primary color, it will now be this color. So let me see. Yep, and it's that kind of white, light gray color. So notice as well, it automatically detected it was a light background and it changed the text to black for us, which is pretty cool. Anyway, that's the primary color. What if we also want to change the secondary color? Well, what I'm going to do is say secondary like this, and I'm going to take a different approach this time. I'm not going to go into this object and declare main. Instead, what I'm going to do is use a color object from Material UI, and this is going to be purple. So I'm going to click on this to auto import it, and notice we're getting the color purple from the colors part of Material UI. Now, there's loads of different colors in Material UI, and if you want to browse them all, go to the docs and search for palettes, click on this, and we can see all of the different colors. Oops, this isn't the one. Let me instead go to color, click on this one. Hopefully this is the one. Yep, this is the one. So you can see down here all of the different colors we have. So I think I said purple. Yep. So it's from this part of the palette right here. Now, if we go back to the theme right here and open up the palette and go to secondary, for example, notice how we have all of these different values. We have the main, which is the main theme color, but also a light version, a dark version, and the contrast text. Now, if we use a Material UI color object like this, it applies all of the different values for us, light, main, and dark automatically. So we don't have to worry about specifying each one, because this is a purple object, not just a single color. So that's the secondary color. Now, if I save this and preview, I don't think we have anything secondary. So let me go back to the create component and let's change this to secondary instead and press save. And now we can see it's kind of like this purpley color. Now, I also want to use my own custom font instead of Roboto in every component. So what I'm going to do is use Google Fonts for this. And I want to use this Quicksand font right here. So what I'll do is select all of these styles for the different font weights like this. And then I will go over here to the import section and I'm going to grab this import right here. So what this does is import the fonts into our project via CSS. Now we could do this instead using a link and add this to our HTML file, much like we did the Roboto font. This time though, I'm going to use this approach right here. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste it inside index.css up here like so. And let me just move this back over here. So now we're importing the font. However, at the minute, if I check this out, nothing is using that font. And that's because, again, in the default theme, Roboto is the main font. Let me go back to the theme and come down to typography right here. And you can see we have a font family property, which is saying Roboto. And also we have all of these different font weights as well. So what I want to do is override some of these values, this to use Quicksand, which we just imported, and also maybe some of the font weights as well. So let me go back to app.js, and this time, after palette down here, I'm going to add in another property. And this property is typography. And the First property inside this I want to change is the font family, and all I need to do is reference this thing right here, Quicksand, because that's what the font is called. We've loaded it in and now we can use it inside our theme. So let me paste it right here, and now it's going to use Quicksand by default. Okay, I also want to just update the font weights just so it looks a little nicer. So I'm going to say font weight, oops, and the first one is going to be light, and I'm going to set that equal to 400. And we imported all of these different font weights right here, by the way, 400, 500, 600, and 700. They're the ones we're going to use. So this is 400, and in fact, I'm just going to copy that a few times. Then I'm going to change light right here to be regular, and this is going to be 500, and then the next one, 7. So let's go back over here, and we can see this is now Quicksand. Cool. So then, this is how we can specify our own values using a custom theme. So doing this, along with our ability to make extra styles using that make styles function, makes Material UI really flexible and customizable, so that all of our websites don't look identical.